They called it creative block. For me, it was a disease. For 3 years, I had not touched a brush. The studio smelled of thick dust and stale regret. My hands remained steady, useless, resting on cold tables. I spent nights staring at blank canvases until my eyes burned. Then came last Tuesday. I woke at 3 a.m. My skin felt like it was burning from the inside out. I did not choose to stand. I did not choose to walk. My body moved with a frantic, rhythmic precision I did not recognize. I grabbed the charcoal. I grabbed the pigments. I began to paint. A woman emerged from the void of the canvas. She had long hair, a deep, striking shade of red, and stood in a dress of emerald green. She stared at a shattered mirror. I had never seen her, yet the canvas felt warm to the touch. My heart hammered against my ribs as my fingers dragged across the surface. I was no longer in control of my own studio. The paint flowed as if it were bleeding onto the frame. I could not stop. I did not want to stop. The next evening, I walked into the local gallery, the image of the woman still burning behind my eyelids. I scanned the room, looking for anything to ground my racing thoughts. Then, the air left my lungs. She was standing by the center pillar. I froze, my feet anchored to the floorboards. It was her. The same hair, the same gaze, even the small silver ring on her finger. I moved toward her, my pulse thrumming in my ears like a drum. When I reached her, I struggled to form a coherent sentence. "My name is the artist," I managed, my voice sounding thin and distant. She turned, and her smile was identical to the one I had captured on canvas. When I mentioned my work, the light in her expression shifted, flickering for a heartbeat. I said nothing of the painting, terrified that the truth would brand me a madman. I stood there, trapped in a cold realization that tightened around my chest. I had painted her before she even chose to wear that dress. Every thread, every strand of hair existed in my mind before it existed in this room. I was no longer just an observer of my art. I was a creator of the present. Over the following month, Clara and I grew inseparable. I wanted to believe the coincidence was just a fluke of the mind. But the fever always returned. It started as a low hum at the base of my skull, then surged, forcing my hand back to the easel. My paintings stopped being portraits. They became blueprints for disaster. One night, I painted a dog lying motionless in the street. By dawn, I heard the screech of tires and a sickening thud outside my window. I ran to the glass. A car sped away. The dog lay exactly as I had drawn it. The cycle accelerated. I painted smoke, and a bakery 3 blocks over burned by noon. I painted clouds, and a sudden, violent storm shredded the neighborhood trees within hours. I stopped sleeping. I stopped eating. I stood before the easel, trembling, watching my own hands work against my will. I was no longer an artist recording the world. I was a puppet, forced to draft the tragedies that were about to happen. Every stroke of the brush was a death sentence. Every color I laid down became a reality I could not undo. The pressure in my skull became a physical weight, a vice tightening with every passing hour. I tried to walk away from the studio, but my knees buckled. It was not just a mental block anymore. It was a biological command. I sat on the floor, hands pressed against my temples, trying to force the silence back into my mind. The air in the room felt thick, vibrating with the demand for pigment and oil. I reached up and gripped my own arms, forcing my hands to stay flat against my thighs. But the muscles jumped and spasmed, fighting my control. A sharp, stinging heat began to radiate from the base of my neck down to my fingertips. Every second, I refused to pick up a brush. The sensation worsened. It felt as if my marrow were boiling. I stood up, staggered toward the workbench, and fell against the wood, gasping for air. My bones ached with a deep, grinding friction, as if they were trying to snap themselves into a new shape if I did not paint. I felt as though my skeleton would shatter into dust. I looked at the clean canvas on the easel, and my fingers began to twitch, reaching out in a desperate, involuntary rhythm. The pain demanded to be fed. Last night, the fever reached a breaking point. I grabbed every brush in the studio, shoved them into a steel lockbox, and hurled the key into the dark alley behind the building. I locked the studio door and collapsed onto the bed, praying for sleep to silence the madness. I woke up at 4 a.m, not in my bed, but sprawled on the cold floorboards. A dull, throbbing ache radiated from my hands. I held them up to the moonlight, My fingernails were jagged and torn, stained with dried blood from clawing at the heavy wooden drawers of my desk. I had tried to reach the brushes even while unconscious. I scrambled to my feet, lungs burning, and turned toward the easel. A new painting sat there, wet and shimmering in the low light. It was Clara. She was lying lifeless on the exact spot of the floor where I had just awakened. Standing over her was a tall, dark figure, its face obscured by a heavy shadow. The paint looked fresh, glistening like arterial spray. I reached out to touch the canvas, but my hands recoiled. The image was undeniable. It was not a prediction of the future. It was a blueprint of a crime. I could not let this happen. I grabbed the palette knife from the table, my grip white-knuckled and trembling. I lunged at the easel, driven by a desperate need to shred the image of her lying there. The blade struck the surface with enough force to cut through heavy fabric, but it did not sink in. It bounced off. The paint was not soft oil. It felt as hard and cold as hammered iron. I struck again, harder, dragging the metal tip across the center of the canvas. No tear, not even a scratch. The image of the body on the floor seemed to mock my futile efforts. I dropped the knife, the sound of it hitting the floorboards echoing like a gunshot in the cramped room. My chest heaved as I stared at the impossible surface. Then, the silence of the studio was shattered. My phone buzzed on the workbench, a sharp, repetitive vibration that made me jump. I snatched it up. A message from Clara. "I am nearby. Can I stop by your studio?" My heart hammered against my ribs. A frantic, uneven rhythm. I looked at the painting, then at the door, then back at the painting. The walls felt like they were closing in. I had to stop her from coming inside. I lunged for the light switch, plunging the studio into absolute blackness. The click echoed, followed by the heavy thud of the deadbolt sliding home. I retreated into the corner, pressing my back against the rough plaster, forcing my lungs to slow. Every muscle in my body turned to stone. The floorboards beneath me felt like a cage. Outside, the hallway light flickered, casting a sliver of yellow beneath the door frame. Then, the sound I feared most, knuckles against wood. A sharp, rhythmic rap. Clara was there, just inches away from the iron-hard canvas that predicted her end. She knocked again, louder this time. I clamped both hands over my mouth, biting down hard on my knuckles to stifle a sob. My pulse thundered in my ears, louder than the wind rattling the window panes. I did not move. I did not breathe. I waited for her to realize I was gone, willing the door to hold against her presence. The hallway remained silent. I kept my eyes fixed on the sliver of light, my entire existence reduced to the agonizing wait for her footsteps to retreat. A muffled voice drifted through the wood. "Are you there?" Clara called out, her tone curious, followed by a soft, questioning sigh. I squeezed my eyes shut, my fingernails digging into my palms until I felt the sharp sting of skin breaking. I refused to answer. To speak was to invite the prophecy inside. She knocked once more, a tentative, lingering sound that seemed to vibrate through the entire doorframe. Then, the silence returned, heavier than before. I counted the seconds, my heartbeat slowly leveling out from its frantic sprint. 5 seconds. 10. 20. Finally, the distinct click of her heels began to echo on the floorboards outside. Click, click, click. They grew quieter with every step, moving further down the hallway toward the stairwell. I waited until the sound vanished entirely into the hum of the building. I let out a jagged, shuddering breath, the air rushing into my lungs like cold water. My muscles unlocked, and I slumped against the wall, my forehead dripping with sweat. I had done it. I had stayed silent. I had hidden, and she had walked away unharmed. The curse had been denied. I was safe. I stood up, my knees popping in the silence. The air felt thin, stripped of the terror that had choked it moments ago. I reached out, my fingers trembling as I brushed the wall, and flicked the light switch. The studio flooded with harsh, clinical white light. I turned toward the easel, ready to destroy the canvas that had dared to threaten her. I expected to see the same image of her, broken and still. Instead, the surface seemed to pulse. I blinked, stepping closer, my heart hammering against my ribs. The thick, dark pigments were crawling. They rippled like black water, sliding across the weave of the canvas with a wet, dragging sound. I reached out to touch the frame, but pulled back as the oils bubbled and reformed. The form on the floor was shifting. The long hair retreated, turning into the short, jagged lines of my own silhouette. The emerald fabric dissolved, bleeding into the rough textures of a paint-splattered brown shirt. The body on the floor was no longer hers. It was mine. I stared at the canvas, unable to look away as the paint settled into a new, horrific truth. I had not saved her. I had simply paved the way for my own end. I could not breathe. My lungs felt like they had been filled with cold, wet clay. I backed away from the easel, my heels scraping against the concrete floor, and stumbled toward the wall-length mirror. I needed to see myself. I needed to prove that the world was still solid, that I was still standing. I grabbed the edge of the glass, my knuckles white, and forced my eyes to focus on my own face. My skin was pale, my eyes wide with a frantic, animal terror. I looked for a mistake, a trick of the light, a stray shadow. Then I saw it. In the reflection of the room behind me, the space was not empty. A tall, dark shape stood in the corner, a hooded figure. It did not move, yet it occupied the air with a weight that made my teeth ache. I spun around, heart slamming into my throat. The corner was empty, nothing but dust and shadow. I turned back to the mirror. The figure was still there, closer now, its head tilted as if listening to my frantic pulse. I finally understood. The painting was never a warning, it was a blueprint. I had spent months trying to stop the brush, but the canvas had already finished its work. It was not waiting for me to fail. It was waiting for me to realize that I had never been in control.